is Lance von Erich getting ready to do Hannibal TV in Las Vegas. Right behind me is a spear.
This is Hannibal from the Hannibal TV on YouTube, and today as my guest we have none other than Lance von Erich, the famous von Erich that was not the legitimate son. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So could you tell us about your upbringing a little bit? Your legitimate upbringing, like where you grew up and what your amateur sports background was like?
Yeah, I was born in Dallas, and I was there for 15 years, and then I moved away outside the country, and then came back. And that's where I worked for a year, and that's how I actually had met David Manning. I just won a competition in bodybuilding, and he was following me on a golf course, and he wasn't looking. I was playing with 3 other people, and he wasn't really looking at me. He was looking at my legs. I was like pretty cut up because obviously just coming off of competition, bodybuilding obviously. And he came up to me and said, "Listen, are you interested in actually coming to becoming a wrestler?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't think so." He said, "Listen, come and see me, and I think that you would be perfect in what we've got, and I've got an idea for you, and I'll have to present it to." And then later it was to the Von Erichs, and he said, "You need to come down to the Sportatorium." And I had seen on television when I was a kid the world famous Sportatorium, and when I got there, it was a dump. I was like, this is the world famous Sportatorium? I wasn't a wrestling fan, but I'd actually, had seen wrestling several times on television, and obviously it was, during Fritz's time. And I drove up in a Jaguar, and I remember, and I was making really, really good money. I was selling real estate, and I remember meeting George Weingroff, and I believe at that same meeting that I'd met Iceman King Parsons, and I think it's at that time, and they both asked me, they said, "Why would you want to wrestle?" Because, it's not a lot of money. And they didn't know that I was going to be pitched as a Von Erich.
Right.
And I came a little bit too late. I think that their heyday was a couple of years before I got there. That's when they had these huge audiences.
We always hear that one of the mistakes, quote unquote, that they made with bringing you in as a Von Erich was because you were already known in Texas from high school sports. How well were you known as yourself before that? I
don't think really that made a difference at all in reality. I think that was just an excuse for them to, to actually, how they had actually let me go. On television, they had said that I wasn't a real Von Erich, and the crazy thing is, I think the problem was that they were afraid that I was actually going to go to work for McMahon.
Yeah.
And they couldn't have thought of a better way. I know they could have, but they couldn't have thought of a better way to actually, get rid of me. Not get rid of me, but make sure that they had everybody know that I wasn't a Von Erich. And quite frankly, I would have just gone to South Africa, and that's where I was headed anyway. And they could have, they wouldn't have ever heard from me again, because I've lived outside the country since, I had left.
So when you were going through the towns of wrestling, you wouldn't have people like heckling you that
Never.
You're not a real Von Erich?
Not once.
Right.
No. Never heard. I mean, maybe they said it, but I never heard it.
So obviously you were a golfer. That's where David Manning discovered you. Did you play any other sports?
Look, I was a bodybuilder and a power lifter. I wasn't playing any sports in school. So, then the people that would meet me from that would have no idea, where I came from or what I was doing. The guys I competed against. I competed internationally. but they wouldn't have known the difference one way or the other.
So there was no interest at all in competing in wrestling at that time. David Manning just sees your look and decides to approach you.
Yeah, they had lost David, and they were desperate to find somebody to kind of take over, some of the load. And I was wrestling in, the Von Erichs couldn't make it to their towns anyway. They just, for whatever reason, they just weren't able to make it. And so I was working twice a day, many days. It's kind of funny because Kevin and I, all these years he's kind of bashed me, and I didn't really know, that Kevin was the one that I didn't get along with. Not that I didn't get along with him, just had no interaction with him. Kerry was a good friend of mine at the time, and he made me feel welcome to the family. Kevin just was, on his own pluck. He did his own thing anyway. And so they weren't able to make it to the towns, and I was wrestling twice a day. And I heard Kevin, do an interview and was bashing me. And so the guy that wrote my book with me actually got in contact with him, and they got to talking, and Kevin wrote me a email and said, listen, I didn't understand how difficult it was for you. And on the other hand, and he said some stuff, and on the other hand, I didn't know how difficult it was for him, and so he just said, good luck and wish you the best of the book. And I thought that was actually good on his part, after all these years, because I've never said anything bad about the family ever. I never even talked about them up until the book.
Right, and that's Lance by Chance that Vinny helped you write.
Yeah, right.
So as far as you getting into wrestling, did they send you to Portland to train, or did you have any training?
I had some training here. In Dallas. But it was the Freebirds, and it was George Weingroff, and none of them. After traveling all night, in those days it was, you were driving to the towns, and Fritz would ask them to come up and train me, and obviously nobody wants to do that, so. I got sporadic training here and there, and what ended up happening was I had my first match was in Oklahoma with Jake the Snake, and I wore a hood. And I remember, I did that match, and then they decided that they were going to send me off to Portland. And so Don Owen was a promoter at that time in Portland. He took me. I lived with Billy Jack Haynes, who's now in prison actually.
Yeah.
And I lived with him, and I got some training there. But I was really green when they took. I wasn't ready for that spot and the way they threw me into that. And Don Owens told me, he goes, you need to stay here for a couple of years and then go to New York, but you need to be here. You don't need to be in Dallas. They're not going to. He didn't know I was going to go as a Von Erich, but he said, you're never going to get over on the boys. Those boys will always come first. And quite frankly, you're not ready to be in a spot like that. And he was right. If I had to do it over again, I would have probably stayed in Oregon for a couple of years and then moved on.
I was friends with Billy Jack Haynes to an extent, right up until he got, sadly, those accusations against him, and it's not looking good right now. What was your experience like with him?
I got along with him really well. I traveled to all the towns with him. At that time, he wasn't drinking or doing drugs, and we rode together. He had a Corvette at that time, and, I can't talk, I have only good things to say about Billy Jack Haynes. He had a reputation for not being able to work with promoters, and I know that, he was difficult with a lot of people, but with me, he had always treated me well.
Did you ever witness his temper?
I did. There was a Russian, I don't even know what he actually went by, but he was a supposed Russian, and he was in the change room, and he was giving Billy Jack, a little bit of lip. Billy Jack put him in a front face lock and choked him out, and that's the last time I ever saw the guy. He was only there for one day, and he got choked out and gone.
Was there much interaction with Billy Jack and Chris Adams in those days?
You mean them together?
Yeah, because I think Billy ended up marrying Chris Adams' wife.
Oh no, it was the other way around, I think, wasn't it?
Okay. I think the story Billy told me, which you might know better because he was a bit delusional, he said that Chris was, and I don't mean that in a negative way, like it's just a fact, but Chris was supposedly beating Jeannie and cheating on her, and she didn't want to go back to England, so her and Billy Jack made a deal that he would marry her so she wouldn't have to go back to England.
He didn't tell me that. I knew that they were involved, but he didn't tell me anything about that, and that was before I knew Chris Adams. I didn't know anything other than, he was wrestling in world class. I know that Billy Jack didn't like him. I do know that.
How was Matt Bourne in those days?
Matt was a great guy. I liked him a lot, and I had some great matches. I did get in a fight with him in South Africa.
Oh yeah, you want to tell us that?
So Matt Bourne and I were sharing a room in South Africa. I had actually flown into South Africa from Zimbabwe. And so I actually was sharing, my house was in Cape Town. And I was coming back from Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. And Matt and I were sharing a room. And I had a friend come over, and I let her wear Matt's shirt. Matt, and I didn't know this, but she took it home with her. And he was looking for the shirt, and I said, I didn't steal your shirt, I let a girl wear it. And he came apart, and he said, no, you stole it, blah, blah. And we had this big knockdown, drag-out fight in the hotel room. And I had a bloody nose, he had a bloody lip, and I found out later that, it was actually, and he was pissed off that she had taken it, and, she thought it was mine. And so anyway, so I apologized to him, and then we went out and had a few drinks, and everything was cool, but it was kind of funny because...
Was he already into his drug issues in those days?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a great guy. I like him a lot. He had a problem. Because my contacts in South Africa, I knew he asked me to help him out with some pain medication, and I actually took him to a doctor. And we talked about this earlier when I did the stems, the injection, the IV. But he liked South Africa because it was easy to get. It was very easy to get pain medication in South Africa. But I don't know anything other than the pain medication. I know he liked to drink. Yeah. But most of the wrestlers at that time, were drinking. We drink 12 beers on the way to wrestle. It was crazy. In those days, it was just, you could drink and drive. Nobody ever got pulled over, especially in South Africa. And everybody would just have a big party on the way to the show and on the way back.
I heard about Portland at one point. Piper came, and they in one of his runs, the booker pulled, and I think he was with either Playboy Buddy Rose or Matt Bourne, one of those two, where as soon as they had their booking meeting, they each were given an 8-ball as kind of like a bonus for ride. Did you hear that one?
I heard, yeah.
I think it was Matt Bourne, actually, for sure.
Yeah, I heard about those days. And Playboy Buddy Rose.
Yeah.
Yeah, he also, and Bobby Jaggers. I don't know, I don't know how much you know about Bobby Jaggers.
He passed away about 10 years ago, I think, just more.
Yeah, it's funny because I bought a van, a Good Times van.
Yeah.
And I would drive to the towns, and it would be Bobby Jaggers, myself, and Steve Simpson, and Billy Two Eagles, and Jerry Gray, and Steve Party, and we'd all be in that Good Times van. And it was kind of funny because, it would be one big party back there, and I wasn't into the cocaine or anything, but, when I could hear them on the way to the towns, like snorting their cocaine.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it was. You know, we'd all be drinking on the way there. And I really liked that territory.
Yeah.
It was fun. And it wasn't a big territory, so you could actually travel. The farthest we ever went was 8 hours, you know, and that was to Medford, Oregon.
Yeah. So you guys are showing up at the matches. You're not so bad with the drugs, but it wouldn't be uncommon that someone's consumed numerous lines of cocaine and a 6-pack or 2 of beer before you get in the ring with them.
And I think that their thought was that they could drink, but if they would do the lines, because it would be like before you, like maybe 45 minutes before you got to the town.
Yeah. And
it would sober them up, you know, to be able to, you know, to wrestle a little better. I don't know how.
It's not like that at all now.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it's a business now.
Yeah.
You know, in those days it was crazy. You know,
But the characters were better back then because they were so crazy.
Yeah. You know, I watch the wrestling now. I mean, I don't often, but I mean, I've watched it. You know, and I think especially with our wrestling in Portland, at that time I was only wrestled in Portland. Yeah. But in Dallas later when I got there, the wrestling just seemed so much more believable. It wasn't so, you know, showmanshipy, you know, and it was, the fans were I guess they still are diehard fans, but I mean, the people that went to see the wrestling there, you know, weekly they were coming. You'd see the same people in all the towns, and that's both in Dallas and also Portland.
What was the pay like in Portland when you were starting off?
Well, I considered it my dues, but I was probably making $250 a week.
Oh, wow.
You know, because I owned the Good Times van. I sold my Jaguar, bought a Good Times van, and you know, so all the other wrestlers would pay me the trans. You know, so I was able to keep what I made, but it's still, you know, it wasn't a lot. It wasn't the kind of money I was used to, but I thought, well, that's my school. You know, because I know a lot of people pay big money to go to wrestling school, and it doesn't guarantee them a job either. You know, I was very lucky, and I never had anybody ever, you know, like really hurt me as far as, you know, everybody took care of me. Yeah. And in Dallas too, even though, you know, I think a lot of them thought that I didn't pay my dues. The only person that ever hurt me was Nord the Barbarian. He threw me in, you know, in a body slam, and I hit my shoulder, and this is why my shoulder is so messed up today.
He's a pretty wild guy, isn't he?
He just was very clumsy, you know, really clumsy. And he was a friend of Bruiser Brody's, and that's who actually broke him in. And I was really good friends with Bruiser Brody, you know, and we went to Israel several times together, and both of us got there early, you know, so we spent, you know, quite a bit of time. He's a real family man too, you know. It wasn't the type of guy you'd go see party all night long. But anyway, that's how Nord, I guess, got his start. But he hurt a lot of people, and I don't think he meant to. I just think he just didn't take care of them. Maybe he did. Maybe he just didn't care.
He had a wild side too in the bars, but I guess you probably didn't hang out with him too much.
Not at all. You know.
What was Brody like? You said family man. Is there anything you could tell us about him that we might be surprised about?
No, he would, you know, he would actually go to his room after a show, and you didn't see him go out with the boys, you know. And I went out a lot in Portland, but I didn't go hang out with the guys in Dallas. You know, it just didn't seem like that territory was, you know, like that. I mean, the only people I would actually see was Kerry, and also Steve Simpson, of course. Yeah. You know, and Steve had just gotten married, and so I didn't see him a lot because of that. You know, but we used to hang out a lot together. But Brody, you know, I know that he called his wife 4 or 5 times in a day. And in those days, you know, you had to go to a payphone to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and he was a very nice guy. He didn't take shit from anybody either, and the promoters also, you know, had a hard time with him, just like Billy Jack.
Did you ever wrestle Brody?
With him, I didn't wrestle against him.
Would he be the type that would plan a match out, or would he call it in the ring?
He called it in the ring. Actually, in those days, everybody called it in the ring. Yeah, I didn't really. It was very seldom. So the finish, maybe you'd go over the finish, but the rest of the match was called in the ring.
Yeah, because I noticed on the Iron Claw movie, which seemed to have a lot of flaws in it, it made it seem like Brody is the type that would plan a match, and I was just thinking to myself, that doesn't seem at all like his personality.
Nope. He would talk about the finish, and just like all of that movie I watched, and it's kind of funny because the guy that played my part, or supposedly to play my part, I met him in a signing in New York, in New York. I guess we were still in New York.
You did play your part. They just didn't use much of it, I guess.
Well, I asked him because he, you know, I met him and he was like excited to see me. He said he read my book and everything, and you know, he knew a lot about me. And he said, you know, I said, what happened? And he says, it was a lot of dialogue. I was really pissed off. This is him saying this. He says, I was pissed off because, you know, I learned all this dialogue. I had like 7 minutes of talking to somebody. You know, I don't know who, he didn't tell me who it was, but, you know, 7-minute dialogue, and they said they cut it all out. And as well as Chris, you know, because the movie was so long, it would have been so long, they cut a lot of it out. I watched it and I didn't even finish it. I didn't.
Yeah, I actually fell asleep through it twice.
Yeah, you know, it's crazy because I live in Mexico, and when the movie had come out, it's the only time that I've seen that, you know, they gave a guarantee if you didn't like the movie, they give you your money back. And, you know, it's one of my, somebody that I know very well had actually called me and said, you know, I'm watching the movie, and they've given you, it's right before the movie started actually, they said that they were at the movie theater, and they said that on the bottom of it said, if you don't like the movie, that will, it's, you know, it's A+ rated. If you don't like the movie, then we'll give you your money back. And it did really well in Mexico, funny enough, and a lot of people had seen it, but I personally, I didn't like the movie. I didn't, you know, and I got to tell you that Fritz was tougher than what they made him out to be, and they made him out to be kind of a tyrant. He was tough.
Now, I guess it was good publicity for the Von Erichs in the end, but what do you think? I don't know if you have a sibling or not, like if they want to cut your brother out of a family movie, would it matter? Would it depend on the pay, or would you be offended?
I think I would be pissed off because he was such a part of the family. You know, they tried to put, you know, get him to wrestle, and he was a little guy. You know, Mike didn't want to wrestle either. It's kind of funny to watch those two. You know, they go to the towns or whatever, and they were still kids. They were, you know, I remember all they talked about were video games, and you know, they just didn't look like they should be there. And I know Mike didn't want to wrestle at all. He wanted to be on the production side of things.
Right.
You know, and it's kind of interesting because Fritz, you know, I met him for the first time, and I met him up in this world famous Sportatorium up in the top floor. And I got to tell you, if you walk through there and looked at it, and I remember having a friend of mine come from Israel to visit, and he, you know, our television went to on Channel 39 to the Middle East. It was actually to Lebanon, but they could catch it in Israel, and it was very, very big in Israel. And my friend came to visit, and he said that he could not believe that this thing that he thought was going to be, you know, so beautiful was the Sportatorium. And I remember him saying that he didn't know how it didn't catch on fire, because it was a fire hazard. It truly was. It was all wood on the inside. Did you ever go?
No.
They had
seen it though.
Raw wires hanging up, going across the beams of you know, most of it was wood and metal.
Yeah.
And
there was rats in it too, right?
There's rats in it, yes, and but I went to see him, and I'll never forget watching him when I walked into his office. Papers everywhere, and very dark, and all I could see when I opened the door was smoke coming out because he was a smoker. And I remember him having 2 cigarettes lit, and he was like back and forth with 2 different cigarettes, and I sat there and kind of choked through that, and he was telling me his idea of what he wanted to do and why he wanted to do it.
That would have been a movie scene. They really it would be like a good Netflix series, because your whole ordeal is almost a movie in itself, and there's so many chapters of the Von Erichs that need to be covered a lot better.
Well, it's crazy because Carrie and I went to Israel the first time together.
Yeah.
And I remember we had like 35,000 people waiting to actually see Carrie and myself.
Wow.
And obviously more Carrie, because at that, I was just getting started too, and he was well known. But it was unbelievable how many people were there whenever it landed in Israel.
How do you react to that? What's going through your head?
In my head, I was thinking to myself, truly, I hope I'm getting paid well for this, because this is a huge, huge crowd.
Yeah, that's Beatles level.
It was, and everywhere we went, we packed the houses.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you kind of a funny story. Carrie stayed, he met the doctor there. The doctor was on call with us, and Carrie, and I had a girl that I met that I actually dated for several years. I would go back and forth and see her in Israel.
Yeah.
And Carrie and I were sharing a room, and I'll never forget, she was in bed with me, and she looks up in the light, those overhead lights?
Yeah.
There was you remember in the old days when they used to have cameras, the 35 millimeter film, the plastic things?
Yeah.
There was 2 of them taped up there. And she tells me, she tells me in Hebrew, she says, "What's going on? What is this?" And I said, "I don't know." And she pulls it out, and she opens it, and there was at least, the whole thing was full of pills. There's at least 20 different colors of pills. And she asked me, "Are you a drug addict?" I said, "They're not mine." And he had taped it on my bed, and I don't know why he would have taped it over my bed.
He was probably so messed up that he forgot.
Probably. But we went to Haifa, and that's Haifa, Israel is also a big Christian. There's a lot of Christian Arabs there, and they're citizens. They're not like in the Gaza and all that. They live in Israel, and they're citizens. And I remember Carrie was trying to get drugs from the doctor, and the doctor, he was kayfabing us. He was, keeping the door closed. Well, he was supposed to do a run-in with One Man Gang and Chris Adams, and so I tied his shoelaces on the other side of the door. There's, how they actually, they have that little thing that you can actually lock the door, open.
Yeah.
To keep it open. Say it's a door stopper, but in Israel it has a hole there in the door. You put the little metal thing into that, and it'll hold the door. So I tied
I know what you mean.
So I tied his boot laces to the door, and so when it was time for him to run out, he actually slipped and fell on his face, and he couldn't figure out how his boots got tied up. He never knew it was me, but all of us were just dying laughing.
Is it true that nobody knew that he was missing a foot? Because that seems a little hard to believe.
That was before, that was after my time. I had already been out of the country, and I was just living in South Africa again, and I've talked to people that said that, he wouldn't take a shower with anybody. And I don't know if this is true. Supposedly he was in a match with somebody, and they'd actually, and I got this in South Africa from Matt Boren, that said that somebody had pulled his boot off, and his whole foot came off with the boot.
Yeah. So that would have been another thing inaccurate about the movie that had happened earlier than with the foot, because they make it seem like it happened the night of the Ric Flair match.
Well, I'll tell you, I was there when he went to the hospital. I went to visit him several times in the hospital in Dallas, but they hadn't amputated his foot.
Okay.
You know, that was after I had left that had happened. I do know that they took part of his lat to put, and he would have been okay. What happened was he got on his foot too soon. You know, he was, and this is all after the fact. I'd already left at that time, but I know that he was walking way too fast. They didn't want him to, but his dad wanted him back.
Yeah. What's like an example of Fritz for the people that try and say that he was, because now it comes out that he's nicer than they portray him in the movie, and a lot of people think that he was too mean in the movie, but you're saying you didn't actually portray him as mean as he really was.
I don't know if I wasn't there. I don't know if he said that, when at the table where he was telling, you're my favorite son right now, and you're saying, I can't see that, but I do know that he was really tough on the boys, and he was tough on, I'd hear him yelling at people up, and I don't know who it was that he was yelling at. Because 4 or 5 people would be up there, in his office, and Bronco Lubitsch is in Sportatorium in that office. Fritz's office was up on top, and then you could walk down the stairs, and there was another office, and Bronco Lubitsch had one desk on one side, and David Manning on the other. So when I would go in to get my paycheck, I could hear them. But I do know that, I could hear him yell at people, and I had him yell at me too. So.
What was your reaction when he yelled at you? Were you making enough money?
No. That's, when I got hurt, how I ended up leaving is I said I wanted more money. And if you were to speak to David Manning, I heard him do an interview, and he said, that the one thing that they should have done was pay me more, and I would have been very loyal if they had paid me, but I wasn't making, and I was doing the main events, and although I was green, I still was working twice a day, and I did keep, because they needed a Von Erich on the card, and so I helped them out tremendously, and the fact that they needed somebody. Especially, after, Mike died.
I just watched it today where you're introduced with Mike at Texas Stadium. How much of that was pre-planned? And were you even paying attention to how depressing Mike was that day? Or were you just so excited to be joining the crew that you didn't even notice? Because looking back on it, it's terrible to see like how sick Mike looks. It's at one of the Texas Stadium shows, and they're saying Mike's going to come back, and Fritz is trying to say, it's going to be in a few months. And then they introduce you, and you say you're going to be starting in a few weeks.
And that's when they shaved Gino Hernandez's head. Yeah, I didn't actually, I was so hyped up because that was the last, in reality, I had wrestled in Fort Worth at that big show, and I held, when you had seen me, I was helping them cut their hair.
Yeah.
I think I got a $4,000 paycheck there, so I thought I'm going to be making some decent money, because I didn't do anything. I made $4,000. 23, 4.
Oh wow.
So I thought, wow, this could be good, but it was just to get me hooked, if I had known the money I was, going to make. And the funny thing is, where I did make money, and they allowed me to do it, which I was surprised. I never asked anybody, but it was appearances. Myself and the Dingo Warrior had the same lady that her name was Jake, and she, she was booking us on appearances. So I'd make $2,500 for an appearance, and if it hadn't been for those appearances, and I'd get 2 of them maybe a month, And I got a free car for doing a commercial for Ford, and so the perks and that part actually saved me, because if not, I wouldn't have been making any money, because I made just as much money in Portland.
Were you paid based on the house, or was there a guarantee?
No. Steve and I don't, we didn't really, other than Steve,
Yeah.
I didn't talk money. I didn't think it was, you're either going to depress somebody or get somebody, or you're going to depress yourself. So, and frankly, it's not my business how much somebody else makes. Steve, on the other hand, because we lived together and, at one time, and, I knew his father fairly well, his family fairly well.
Yeah.
We could talk about it. But, Steve, I don't think, he ended up marrying, his brother actually ended up marrying Carrie's daughter. One of Carrie's daughters, yeah.
Which daughter? Because I'm friends with Lacey. Guessing it's not Lacey.
Not Lacey.
She's the more wild one of the bunch, I think.
Yeah.
I've met Carrie's ex-wife too, Lacey's mom. She's quite a character.
I actually liked her.
Yeah. I like her too. But her partying is still at the level of the 80s.
Well, the last time I saw Lacey, she was in a pram, in a stroller.
It's been that long.
It's been that long since I've seen, her.
So for Mike's death, I heard a story that they wanted you to be one of the pallbearers for the funeral, as if you were like a real family member. Is that true?
Yeah, and I was I was actually in there with the family. And it's kind of weird because, the mom was upset, but everybody else, it was kind of, if I'd lost a brother, I would be distraught. They held it together pretty well. I would have never known, with Fritz, I would have never known that his son would have died. And a brother, okay, but a father to lose a son, is pretty, that's a tough thing to see your son die before you.
Yeah.
And he didn't shed a tear. He just said, stay strong, to everybody else. And I felt very uncomfortable in that situation.
I can imagine.
I'm sitting there with a grieving family, and we're all together looking at, Mike's, coffin, and, all these people are, I don't know if you had seen it on.
Yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
There's a lot of people that showed up for the.
Yeah, they downplayed that in the movie too.
Yeah, it was huge.
Even David's they downplayed, yeah.
And so I don't know, I was very, very, very uncomfortable.
Were you there for Chris's too?
I was not.
Okay.
I'd already left. But, the thing is that if they would have, they kind of forced me to go.
Yeah.
If they hadn't have, said that I needed to go, I wouldn't have gone. I wouldn't even gone.
The one thing about the movie, and I'm sure you may have seen this part of it, when they had Kevin meeting his wife outside of the Sportatorium, it seems to me, and probably it was still like this when you were there, like the Von Erichs were so popular, they couldn't have just mingled out in the parking lot after a Sportatorium show. They would have been...
Run to your car.
Yeah.
Look, whenever I was wrestling there, within maybe 8 weeks, I couldn't go to a restaurant and finish a meal. Literally every 2 seconds, somebody would come up and, want an autograph. And they didn't care. They just would, because the fans there were in love with the Von Erichs.
Right.
They would just push themselves on you. And even when people would tell them to, like the maitre d' or the wait staff, and would say, leave them alone, they would just come, and it was unbelievable. And it was everywhere.
Yeah.
When I went to Israel, without the Von Erichs, even several years later, because I spent months in Israel, I had the girlfriend there, and I could go, her brother and I I brought, you know those old Polaroid cameras?
Oh yeah.
Bought a Polaroid camera, bought about 200 packs of film, and charged $10 per picture, you know, and would go to a fair or something, and literally, I couldn't even stand there. They would actually, you know, like my friend said, I can't take these pictures. These people are going to kill me, you know, and they were fighting over trying to give you, you know, get their picture taken. It was unbelievable. And this lasted for, you know, I was going back to Israel for 10 years after I'd wrestled there the last time. I actually put together, without the Von Erichs, when Bruiser Brody was on the show, I actually had a friend that was the mayor of Dallas at that time, and he wanted to invest some money. He didn't make any money, but we took a show over there, and that's, you know, 10 years after that's the last time I was there as a wrestler. But 10 years after that, I would still go, and there would be hundreds of people. I think if I went back today,
oh yeah, you would still draw there.
Yeah, you know, it's funny.
You're better known probably today than maybe you were through a period of time where the Von Erichs weren't as popular. Now the name's out there again.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And it helped the book too, you know. Yeah. I mean, even though it would have helped more if I'd been, you know. And I was thinking, and I was talking to several of my friends that have known me for a long time, and you know, I was talking about. They said, "Are you mad about the movie that they cut all of it out?" And I said, "No, because I think that possibly that they could have." And I found out by the guy that played me that wasn't the case, but I thought Kevin would have had, you know, like creative, you know, he didn't really have anything to do with the movie.
Right.
He wasn't involved in the making of the movie, because it wouldn't have come out like that at all. You know, they would have made the father, you know, Fritz look much better, and he would have made me look, at that time for sure, because we hadn't patched stuff up, he would have made me look, you know, look bad, I'm sure. So in a way, I was kind of happy that it didn't, I was cut out.
They did make Kevin look like, and I know that he did reform himself, but like I understand from many people, including Jerry Jarrett, that he was almost as bad as Kerry at one point with his partying. What was your view of Kevin as far as the partying?
Exactly the same. The same kind of thing. He just kept it, you know, he wasn't so vocal with the other guys, letting them know what he did.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people didn't like Kevin. There was a lot of wrestlers that didn't like him. They certainly didn't like working with him.
Because he was very stiff, right?
Very.
But
I mean,
in a sloppy way.
Yeah, he would hurt you. I can't tell you how many people, when they wrestled me, they said, "Good, thank God you're not like him," you know, because he really, I mean, he potatoed me several times, you know, and I was on his own team.
Oh, yeah.
But I got.
He was no show in towns too, right? That's
a lot.
One of the things, yeah. So yeah, for him being the one that was always there, the reliable one.
He was just more reliable than Kerry.
Okay.
You know, but he was still. If he had actually not been a Von Erich, they would have fired him. They'd have fired them all.
Right.
Yeah, I can tell you that it's maybe 50% of the time they just didn't make it to the town.
Yeah, because Jerry Jarrett was saying the same thing. Why he broke up with the Von Erichs was because Kevin was no-showing.
Yep.
And he was trying to invest in me. They just became unreliable at one point.
You could imagine somebody coming to see the main event and the main event not showing up.
Yeah.
You know, and even having somebody else, even though it's a Von Erich, if they've come to see, because different Von Erichs had different following, you know. You know, it's kind of funny because I got over really well with pictures, and because I was smart in the fact that, I don't know if you've seen the pictures.
Oh yeah.
Snake. I did a movie in Israel, and me doing the. You know, when I was trying out for the movie, I was shooting the AK-47, and so I took a picture of the AK-47, and so I had things in leopard, and so the pictures were actually doing really well. Thing is, and I had an agreement I would make so much off of each picture, but the pictures that they said I sold and what I was really selling were two different things.
Right.
And it not only happened to me, but it happened to the other von Erichs, and I think that it was Dad that might have done that.
Oh, I see. How was it with the women at that time? Were they swarming you?
A lot. And yeah, they swarmed all all the wrestlers.
Yeah.
I mean, but especially.
But I've heard the Von Erichs were like by far in the history of wrestling the level of screaming and stuff and the pandemonium with the women.
I could literally go out and say, and they would come. It's unbelievable. Kerry even more so because he was friends with celebrities in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I became afterwards. I became friends with some of these guys. But while he was wrestling when I was there, he was already, he was. I remember one of the talk shows on the late night talk shows was talking about Kerry and him winning the world championship from Ric Flair. I remember seeing that on television. So they were talking about him. He dated a Playboy bunny, and so he was really over.
How was the girls in Texas compared to Israel, compared to South Africa?
As far as the looks, or
no, well, I'm sure they were all attractive, but you could that, but also just the way that they would throw themselves at you, because Texas is notorious for it. But you're telling me in Israel you have 35,000 people waiting for you in the airport.
Yeah, and Israel is by far because and remember I went on every show that we had there. I went like a few weeks early. Because I really loved Israel. Yeah. I really loved it. And, the Israeli women are absolutely beautiful, because you get a Moroccan Jew that mixes with a Polish Jew, or a Yemen Jew that mixes with a Russian Jew. So they got very unique, look. And they're all very different, but they are also, very aggressive.
Oh, really?
Well,
I would have thought they'd be less aggressive because of the religious.
It's the most unholy, holy country.
Well, I guess with the war.
It's unbelievable. Jerusalem's different.
Yeah.
That's where the Hasidim, the Hasidic Jews are. The guys that have the ringlets, and the women cover themselves. They wear a wig once they're married. And I remember going to a bar with a friend of mine and said, and I just said it, I was drunk, and I said, hey, let's go fuck. And I thought I was gonna get hit. And the girl says, let me get my purse. That's what she said.
Yeah.
But it was that blatant. And you think about it, they actually, at 18, they're going into the Army. They do 2 years Army, so they're tough.
Even the females?
The men do 3, the women do 2.
Wow.
So I dated Israeli women that carried a machine. They can never leave their machine gun. So if you were dating an Israeli, and I told you I dated an Israeli, they're bringing their gun with them. So you have a girl that has, they're called Galils. They're kind of like a AK-47, but an Israeli version of AK-47. And they put it at the foot of the bed. So they were very, very aggressive, and they lived for today because they didn't know if they're going to be there tomorrow.
Yeah. Were you ever scared for your life over there?
Not in Israel. I have been wrestling, but not in Israel.
Okay, so it was more of a downtime with the wars.
Yeah, we were there during the first Intifada, the first, the first uprising.
Yeah.
I guess when I first went with the Von Erichs, though, I think it was right before the uprising. You know the story about Chris Adams and them smuggling them out of the country, right?
No.
So Chris Adams, the baby faces stayed in Haifa, the rich part of Haifa, Israel.
Yeah.
And it's in the mount. It's like up in the hills, and it's a beautiful area. They call it the sleepy town, though, because it's not known for partying like Tel Aviv. And Chris and them we were up on the mountain, and they were down in the Kiryats, which is like the poor section. And Missy Hyatt, John Tatum were over there with Chris Adams, and Chris Adams wanted to use the telephone. He wanted to call his wife in the States.
Yeah.
And so whenever Chris actually made tried to make the phone call, the guy was eating, he was an Arab, and he was eating his lunch. And he said to Chris, he says, "I'll do it after lunch." And Chris says, "I need to make the telephone call now." And he goes, I can't do it right now. I'll do it after lunch. Well, anyway, I guess an hour and a half went by, and he kept calling down there, and the guy was getting really irritated with him. So Chris, and Chris was, his brother was a judo champion. Right? He won the bronze medal, and Chris also is very good at judo. And so he super kicked the guy and knocked him out and messed him up. The guy went to the hospital. So the police came after Chris. And so Chris, then they were going to put him in jail. So he was in big trouble. And the promoter, or the one that brought us over, had said, Chris needs to get out of the country, because if they catch him, he's going to be in prison. They'll put him in prison. And so David Manning, they had to actually put him in the boot of the trunk of a car and actually drive him to the airport. Went through a security check with Chris in the boot of the car, the trunk of the car, and actually took him and got him on an Air France flight and got him out of the country. And they figured, they closed down the airport. They were looking for him, but he just got out on the plane. He just made it out. Wow. But he messed the guy up. The guy was, I heard, in the hospital for 2 or 3 days. And the funny thing is, he had a twin brother, and a year later, when I was there, not wrestling, but to see this girl, I saw his brother in a rally for, the Hezbollah. He was wearing and I told my girlfriend's brother, I said, "That looks like the guy." And he goes, "Good eye." But he says it's not him, it's his brother. But in the middle of this, he was, in the middle of all these hundreds of people, I'd actually seen him.
Wow.
But anyway, so, we were staying on the other side. This is all from, from what I heard from David, and all the bodyguards, because we had a lot of bodyguards that were taking care of us as well. So it was, it was like a big effort to get him out of the country.
When you went there by yourself later on, I guess you didn't have the bodyguards. I guess, would you just keep yourself armed? Or be with women that carried arms?
No, actually, they were all friendly. They weren't hostile, the Israelis. They were friendly. They just wanted to take a picture with you. And, Israelis are very, I don't know if you've been around Israelis, but
I've only known one.
They're they get what they want. They'll push. They won't, they won't respect your space as a fan. They will actually be all over you to get a picture, and they don't care what you're doing.
Wow.
But man, I never paid for anything in Israel. Nothing. Not even a hotel. They would just say, "You can stay." I go eat. They say, "Yeah, come to the restaurant. Let me take a picture and put it on our wall." And so everywhere I went was free.
Wow.
And I was there for, I guess, 8 months, and I didn't pay for anything. I was 8 months straight in Israel, and I didn't pay for anything. It was actually great.
Did you have an apartment there?
I rented a flat there, and but I didn't even really rent it. I mean, the guy gave it to me for, I just had to pay my utilities.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's a great country. If you're really rich, it's a great country to be in, because truly it is. It's a great place. It's a lot of fun. A lot of history there too.
Right.
If you're a Christian or a Jew, or even Muslim, I guess too, but there's a lot of, that's kind of the Mecca for the Christians and the.
How are the laws there for when the wrestlers were over there doing their drugs? Are they more strict, or was it overlooked for the rest?
Overlooked for us. And I guess if Kerry had got caught, they wouldn't have done anything because he was getting it from the doctor.
Yeah.
It's not like, you're buying it on the street. I remember Abdullah, when the second time that we went over, Abdullah was with us as well, and he wanted to, there's a place where, all the street hookers are.
Yeah.
And I remember we all drove through there, and I remember Abdullah was wanting to get a girlfriend, and they look in the car and see Abdullah, and they're like, no amount of money would we.
No, that's funny.
Yeah, would have no desire. They were really afraid of him.
Oh, you think it was more fear because he was a heel, or
just the look? I mean, but he's scary. You see those ridges in his head. He was scary looking.
Did you ever wrestle him?
Yeah. I've wrestled him. You can go on YouTube, and in Puerto Rico I wrestled him. It was a pretty bloody match too. I was really drunk too when I wrestled him.
Oh yeah. Tell us this story.
No, it's funny because in the change room they had alcohol, so everybody was drinking, and I hadn't had anything to eat, so I was drinking beers, and I got pretty messed up, and I don't think he had been drinking, but I don't know what prompted me to do so, but I actually I juiced myself and the blood just came. It was everywhere.
Was that after your Lance von Erich run?
After Lance von Erich run, yeah.
Did you ever have any pay issues working over there?
Never had a pay issue.
Okay.
The only problem I ever had was just not getting paid well with Fritz.
As far as being afraid with what happened with Bruiser Brody, were you at all concerned when you first went over there?
Well, that happened way after I was...
Okay, what year were you there?
87.
Okay, that makes sense. What were your thoughts when you heard Brody was killed? Because you must have known Invader a little bit.
I did. Actually, I was very surprised. I know that Puerto Rico, the fans, I wrestled in some big houses in Puerto Rico, but you could hear gunshots. The fans were, they were great fans if you were a baby face. If you were a heel, you had to worry about getting stabbed.
Yeah. Who else did you work out there?
The one that I wrestled in Puerto Rico, I didn't stay but 4 days, and I wrestled.
That's why you didn't have any pay issues, because they screw you over when you've been there.
Yeah. Like if you're there for a year and then you leave,
That's what was my experience.
Oh yeah.
They get you locked in there some way, then they start messing with you.
What's the guy's name and I've gone blank. What's the guy's name? The ones that are from Amarillo, Texas, the two brothers. Terry Funk. I remember wrestling him on the other side of the island, and I'd never met him before, and really nice guy, Terry Jr. And I remember he told me, he was calling the match, and he said, chase me into the bathroom and hit me all the way to the bathroom. So I punch him all the way into the bathroom, and he comes out and he's got a toilet seat around his head. And I couldn't stop laughing, because I would have never expected him to actually come out with a toilet seat on his head.
As far as David's death, what do you think was the real cause of his death, David von Erich?
Well, I tell you what they said in Tokyo is that he died of a drug overdose, Placidyls.
Okay.
I don't know that to be the truth, obviously, but they said it was an intestinal parasite. But, you know, I've heard more than one occasion that that's the case, but that's what they had said in Japan, too.
How did you get along with the Freebirds?
I liked Terry Gordy a lot, and I liked Buddy, Michael Hayes. He's kind of like Kevin. I didn't have any, you know, I didn't one way or the other, you know, but Terry Gordy, and a great worker was Terry. You know, for a big guy, he could move too. And he was the most talented of the three, and obviously Michael, not obviously, but Michael, I think, was the least talented of the three.
Did they ever contact you for that WWE Von Erich's DVD when they put that out years ago? It was like a mini documentary on the rise and fall of world class.
Well, they wouldn't know how to get a hold of me.
Okay.
I dropped off you know, when I wrote the book,
They covered you in that, just so you know. I was just wondering if Michael may have had something to do with that, because he works behind the scenes, but that would
probably, if it was bad, it would be either him or...
Your part, what they did look at, that's one of the things that, where you get a bad rap, like, you get thrown into, like, the tragedies of world class, when that really wasn't a tragedy compared to the real tragedies that happened.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, Michael, the three people at Michael, Jim Cornette, and also Kevin, all three of those have bashed me, you know, and I was never around to, you know, I could care less. When I left, you know, and I've been out of, like I said, I've been out of the country forever, and I had three or four people ask me to do a book.
Yeah.
You know, and I never wanted to do it. And then what happened was COVID came along, and then the guy that wrote the book with me or co-authored it, who you know, Vinny, actually contacted me, and something about, you know, COVID had happened and I had nothing to do and I was stuck. You know, it's not like I needed money, you know, and but I just never wanted to talk about it. And then once I got to start thinking about the book and all the stuff and the stories that are in the book, you know, and the first two chapters are about wrestling, and pretty graphic, actually. And it's kind of funny because I have a cousin that lives in Australia, and she came to visit my mom, and I didn't tell anybody I wrote the book. And my mom, you know, asked my cousin for the book, but she'd already finished it. And my cousin gave it to my mom, and my mom read it, and she was horrified when she read the first two chapters, because it's pretty graphic, and it's about the women and, you know, some of the stuff that went on with the wrestling. And the rest of the chapters are about kind of the journey. You know, it's not about wrestling, it's about the things that happened, like the bombing on the train in India, and Chris Adams on the airplane. I rode a bicycle from South Africa all the way to the Congo. And, you know, so it's the stories about...
Why did you do that?
Because two British guys were visiting me in South Africa and said, hey, we're going to go ride a bicycle to the Congo. And I'm like, okay. You know, not knowing how dangerous it was. And I mean dangerous.
You're not talking about a motorcycle, you're talking about...
Bicycle. Yeah. Not to mention that, you know, I went through, I don't know, 30 tire inner tubes and about 300 patches. By the end, we're riding on rims. You know, our tires were even gone, you know, and eventually we just threw the bikes away. But you'd see 4-year-olds with machine guns sniffing glue, you know, and so it was a pretty interesting trip. And knowing what I know now,
yeah,
You know, and if I had a son that said he wanted to ride to the Congo, I would say you're absolutely insane.
Was this for charity or something, or just
to do it?
This sounds like fun.
It was miserable too, you know, because South Africa is it's a third world country, but with first world cities.
Yeah.
Once you get past South Africa, you know, you're talking about, you know, dirt roads and animals and people that are carrying weapons, and you're white, they're not, you know. So the further up you get, the more crazy it gets. And not to mention in the Congo, it rains every freaking day, and it's 100% humidity, and you got everything that can bite you.
Give us some examples of that wild animals there that you would have had to deal with.
Well, many times, you know, those pigs, you know, the boar, you know,
the warthog.
well, they warthogs, yeah. They'll chase you, you know. I mean, they are very dangerous. And
really, wow.
Yeah, I almost lost my leg. I kicked one, and because I was between it and its baby, and the tusk got me, and I got an infection, and it took me a month and a half to get rid of it, and I thought they were going to end up cutting my leg off. But you know, you'd be in the middle of nowhere, and you'd see a lion or a rhino. In South Africa, you see them, but they're on a game park. You know, but the further up you get, they're just kind of roaming around. You know, and the most dangerous is the hippo, and you see them everywhere. So if you're anywhere close to the water, and they're really fast, you know, they're dangerous, and crocodiles as well.
And you're on a bicycle, biking by all these things.
Yeah, it's funny because I made a movie in India that we shot in Kenya as well.
Yeah.
And I remember being in a lake, and it was the Indian directors, and the production was Indian. And I had to learn Hindi in the morning from 5 to 6 to be able to do, I don't speak Hindi, but to learn my lines, you know, to be able to, because they do it in Hindi, you know. And some of it was in English too, because they go back and forth, but a lot of it's in Hindi, so I had to learn my lines in Hindi. But I remember being on a lake, and I was in a balsa canoe, and there was a chief, you know, like you know what a balsa wood is? It's like really light. And the boat was pulling me, and in Africa you have something called bilharzia. It goes through your feet, and it gets into your eyes, and it makes people blind. It's preventable and it's treatable, but a lot of people go blind because they don't have the money to get the medicine. And I kept asking the chief that let us use this balsa, you know, he was on the boat, and I kept asking him about, is there bilharzia in the lake? And he goes, no, it has to be a stagnant lake, you know, like water not running into it. And the river was running into this. And about the 5th time I asked him, he says, I wouldn't be worried about the bilharzia, I'd be worried about the hippos and the crocodiles. And sure enough, about that time, I could hear and this is also the book, but I could hear the hippos in the water. And, you know, there was no stuntmen because there's nobody that looked like me. You know, they're all Indian. So I had to do my own stunts, and that was pretty hair-raising. It was an interesting trip.
So hippos will injure humans. They'll go after humans.
They'll bite you in half. They're very, very, they kill more people than any other animal in Africa.
Really?
Yeah.
And what's the wrestling circuit like over there?
It's big. And funny, I wrestled in Nigeria, I wrestled in Angola, I wrestled in Mozambique, and all over South Africa. And it's actually, they would fly, the promoter that I work for was a very good friend of mine. He actually got murdered. He was dating a girl, and she happened to be married, and the husband found out, and he knocked on the door while she was there. My friend opened the door, and I shot him right in the head with a .44. And that ended that promotion, obviously. But they would fly people in for a month at a time. Matt Boring came over. The guy, the Giant Warrior, I told you about this, actually how I met him. He's originally a Texas boy, but I had met him over there, and he was big in South Africa. Dusty Wolf, I don't know if you know who he was. He was actually doing the booking for South Africa, and they brought Mark Laurinaitis, the Road Warriors brother, in. There was a bunch of people they brought in from England as well, but I think a lot of them made more money in South Africa than they did in the States.
What were the crowds like?
Very big. We had some great crowds, and it's half Afrikaans and half English, meaning the white Dutch. Well, there's also blacks that speak, or coloreds that speak. They're not black, they're not white, they're colored, that also speak Afrikaans, and then you get the English. And the television went all over Africa, and I don't know, you probably don't know that. Well, you may, but there's, it's the biggest continent with the most countries in it, so South African television went all over, the cable went all over Africa, so we were well known in Africa as well, in other parts of Africa.
Does it still exist, that company?
Yeah, there's actually not, the guy that actually, his partner, the one that got killed, his partner had taken over, and he's still, doing the wrestling today. I carried on for another 13 years after I left the Von Erichs, wrestling in South Africa, and I got to the point where I only went if it was someplace, because I owned health clubs. Yeah. And I only went if I hadn't been somewhere, or I liked somewhere, like India I liked a lot. I lived over there for doing this movie for about almost a year. So I liked India, so anytime that there was a promotion going to India, then I would go, and wrestle there. And though that was a big, we would pull in one time 55, 60,000 people. I was really over in India.
As far as wrestling Ric Flair, could you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, I wrestled him early in my career, and obviously I wasn't ready to wrestle him, but he is such a great wrestler that he can make anyone look good, and so he just told me, he said, listen to me and we'll be fine, and I did, and I made it through, and you can imagine only being in the business for a little over a year and having a title shot with a world champion is. Was that in Texas? Yeah. And there's a lot of pressure.
Oh yeah.
You can imagine, and for television, and the guy didn't tell you anything. He just said, just listen to me. Nothing was said to me, not even the finish at the end. We did it all in the ring.
Wow.
And he made me look as good as you could at being so green. Greg the Hammer also, I wrestled him up in New York right after I left the Von Erichs.
I was just talking to him today.
Yeah. I actually saw him a few weeks ago, and
he lives here.
Here in Vegas?
Yeah.
He didn't, I saw him a couple of weeks ago up in New York. He was doing a autograph signing, and I met him just briefly for a second, and he didn't, I don't know if he heard me or if he remembered. I mean, I'm sure he would remember a Von Erich. Yeah. But I don't think he heard what I had said to him, because I said, the last time I saw you here was in New York, and it was 35 years ago. And he goes, hard to remember. So, I don't know if he just didn't hear what I had said, or
Yeah, he's grumpy at times. Some wrestlers too, I find, even if they remember you, it's almost like they get off by saying that they don't remember you. For some reason, it's just a weird business like that.
Well, the funny thing is that in this autograph signing, I met some people that, are now, I wouldn't know who they were because I've been out of the country and I wasn't watching wrestling. I'm watching Mexican television, and so it's not like, I keep up with what's going on in the States in the wrestling anyway. But, I had 4 or 5 people come up to me, they said, we don't know you. I don't know you, but I think what happened with you and the Von Erichs is bullshit, or, I think it was just wrong.
Yeah.
These are some well-known people that actually had said, that they thought that, the story, it was bullshit what happened. And they didn't really understand anything other than, I guess, probably the Von Erichs going out and...
Well, the guy that was going to play you, MJF, he's one of the biggest stars of AEW too. I don't know if you know that. He's like one of the top guys in that company. So
yeah, he was doing the signing. He was off on his own, and it was funny because he actually asked to meet me. And he was a really super guy, and he genuinely was happy. At least it felt like that he was happy to meet someone that he had actually, studied. He said he watched the old tapes and, read the book and all
he
that.
supposedly makes $5 million a year right now.
Really?
Yeah. The pay in wrestling is crazy these days. But he recently signed a new contract. Were you around Gino Hernandez at all?
Yep. Actually, in the beginning, I'd just gotten there. I guess I was there for about 3.5, 4 months before he ended up getting killed.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows. This is just what I, was told by other wrestlers, that he'd actually owed money to somebody, and it was quite a bit of money, and that they killed him for it.
He was a gambler or something, wasn't he?
But I think this was over drugs.
Oh, just using too much and getting in the hole.
That's the story I heard, was that he owed a lot of money to his cocaine supplier.
Well, that stuff adds up. That's a costly habit, sadly.
I know a lot of them did it.
Yeah.
And for me, it never appealed to me.
Yeah.
Drinking I can understand, but shoving something up your nose, and that's, in my opinion, because people that do it, they end up doing a lot of it.
Yeah, and they end up going crazy.
Yeah. I'm talking about wrestlers. I don't know about the general public.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the wrestlers I know as well.
Well, look, all the wrestlers that I wrestled with are pretty much dead.
Yeah. Ultimate Warrior, one of them. I didn't go into too much detail of that. You actually kind of remind me of him in some ways, watching some of his out-of-character interviews, because he was kind of quote unquote like given his position without having to work for it, kind of similar to you.
Yeah.
But you both got over.
Yeah, and it's funny, the reason when I first went to work for the Von Erichs, all that happened, when I was in really, really good shape, and then by the time, I guess the first couple of months, I'd lost my body completely because of the fact that I was on the road all the time, trying to make these towns and not being able to work out in that. And it's funny, if you look at some of the pictures from South Africa, I was 315 pounds, and I was the same, ripped as well. Jim, a lot of people didn't like him, and we were pretty good friends. We rode together in some of the towns. As I told you, that we had the same lady do our promotions, and we did promotions together. Yeah. And I was surprised that when I had seen him on, working for McMahon, because he went from making nothing to making big money.
Did you ever talk to him since he got famous?
I didn't. The only one I ever spoke to, because I was living in South Africa, is Steve Simpson. And that's just because, I was around his brothers all the time in South Africa.
Yeah. Do you think, I know he stayed friends with Kerry, I think. Do you think if you had got a tryout during that time where he had power, he would have tried to not let you get hired, have competition, how it is sometimes, or would he have encouraged them to hire you if you had pursued WWE around the time he was in there?
Who, Kerry?
No, the Ultimate Warrior.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know. Jim was for himself.
Right.
I liked him, but he was very much his own person, and he did what was good for Jim.
Did you know Tony Atlas at all?
I did.
How did you get along with him?
Got along with him. It's kind of funny because I was with him and Skip Young.
Yeah.
And also Iceman King Parsons, and I was the only white guy in the traveling with them, and I had no idea what soul food was.
Right.
And they would stop at all the soul food restaurants, and obviously, it's not my kind of food, and I remember pulling into a restaurant. My first experience was this lady giving us chitlins. And, I'm asking her what it is, and she's telling me it's the intestines of a pig. And I'm horrified. And she goes, it's cleanliness though. They have to be cleanly. She was telling me that they were prepared right, like I would know the difference.
Yeah.
And they did. They tasted like soap. And it's kind of weird being the only white guy in a car.
Yeah. Because
of what they were talking about was so far removed from what I would have known at the time. I like that, and eating fried chicken, and not that that's typical of, all blacks, but they did like.
Yeah. Tony loves it too, because I've hung out with him. He loves fried chicken.
Yeah, but that was their diet, was either soul food or chicken, or soul food or fried chicken.
Yeah. That's it. Did you wrestle Kamala ever?
Yes, but in India.
Okay.
I wrestled him in India. Nice guy. He was on the train that got bombed with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
You were hijacked too at one point, weren't you, in an airplane?
Well, that's kind of a hijacking. Yeah, it was called air piracy. That's when Chris
that was a Chris thing.
Yeah, that was a Chris thing.
That's insane. Were you surprised when you heard about him dying, or were you thinking it's just another...
He had a really, really bad temper.
Yeah.
So that didn't surprise me, actually.
Did you ever meet the guy that killed him, or was that after your time?
It was after my time. But I can see that happening because Chris wasn't a good drinker.
Yeah.
He became violent when he drank.
Do you remember wrestling for Tom Lance? He's a guy I've worked with before. He told me you wrestled for him once before you left Texas.
But where did he?
I'll look it up. But as I'm looking that up, Black Bart just died. Do you have any memories of him?
Yeah, he was a good guy. I liked him. Actually, how I found out is with the guy that I'm, visiting right now in Vegas. Had told me
that he passed.
That he passed away. Yeah.
And he had a struggle. He's another guy that didn't save his money well, sadly.
But most of those old timers didn't.
Tom Lance, because I asked him since we were friends, he said that. Let me just look up the town here. It was 35 years ago. He said that you said, depending on how many beers he gave you before the match, is how good the match was going to be. Does that sound like something you would have said in the 80s?
Yeah, maybe. I would have said that joking, though. Did he say who I wrestled?
1987 at the Oil Palace in Tyler, Texas. Your wife, Candy, worked for his dad for a short time in her regular...
Okay, yeah, I remember him. Yeah, that was That was said in jest.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I remember, there was like 200 people in there. You know, I don't know. I mean, you wrestled, so you know. I don't know if you've ever wrestled with a crowd of 75 people.
It's not fun.
It's very hard. You feel all the bumps. It's just tough. So I probably said that because of the small house that it was.
And you've talked about publicly that, I mean, steroids are pretty much legal now as TRT, but you mentioned at one point you're 315. Where was most of this like just naturally good genetics, or were you actually having, because you're still alive obviously and you're in good health, but like at one point were you just taking a massive amount to get to that side?
I didn't take a massive amount. I had time to rest and I was a really strong guy. You know, steroids don't make you, you know, just because you take them doesn't make you big. You have to work out. You just recuperate faster, you know. But I didn't take nearly what other people did.
Rick Rude, did you know him at all?
Very well. I wasn't friends with him because he was a heel, so I never rode with him or anything. Good wrestler. You know, good talker.
And I've heard you say that you actually enjoyed your matches with Buzz Sawyer, who a lot of people didn't like. What was it about your chemistry with him?
We just got along really well. I liked him and Matt, you know, and they were tag team partners. And I don't know. But like I said, everybody treated me really well. And they both, Matt and both of them were very, very nice to me, you know. And I guess, you know what I think it is? If they had to wrestle a Von Erich,
yeah, they'd rather wrestle you.
They would rather wrestle me because they knew they weren't going to get it. I'm not going to try to hurt them, and I'm not going to, you know, my idea was to have a good match, but not to, you know, potato anybody.
And both of those guys were big cocaine guys, but I think Buzz was even worse than Matt. Were you ever nervous at all, like if someone was like clearly wound up on cocaine and you're having to go in there against them, like especially with the reputation of Buzz as a fighter?
Yeah, but you know, he always, every match I ever had with him, you know, and I don't know what he did beforehand.
Yeah.
You know, but every match I had with him, I had probably the best matches with both of those guys at that time with any of them. You know, those were the two that I actually had the best matches.
Wow.
And they trusted me, you know, I mean, like they gave me more to do than other ones.
You just mentioned how tough your schedule was. Could you talk a little bit more about what a typical schedule would have been like for you as a Von Erich?
Like I remember many times on a Saturday and Sunday doing for instance, an afternoon show in San Antonio and then going to Dallas to do the night show. And I literally would show up many times, like straight from the car, and I was already in my gear, I didn't change, straight from my car to the main event, you know. And that's back in the days when you had to take a map and try to figure out how to get to the,
yeah,
you know, the venue. And I got to tell you that it wasn't, a lot of times that this venue was hard to find, you know, and I can't tell you how many times that I had to unroll that map and try to figure it out. And that was in itself was just a mission, you know. But that would be my Saturday and Sunday. And then, you know, I would maybe have to work on a Monday or Tuesday because Kevin or, you know, Carrie couldn't make it to the town. So I'd have to do the very first match and the very last in the same town. Everybody else is going home after their match. Nobody hung around. You know, if you're on the first match, you know, and some of those drives were 300 miles each way.
Yeah.
You know, back in the day, I flew some, but still, you know, it's not all the time. And some of those, you know, trips were 300 miles. So the quicker you could get out of the out of the venue that you're in and get on the road, the better off you are, because you can at least, have some sleep.
Flying in Texas on an airplane, probably not first class. What would that experience be like with fans?
We flew Southwest a lot. It was tough.
Yeah, that sounds like a horrible thing.
Because then they just, it was weird because I don't know if you remember, I don't know if you flew, well, maybe you didn't, but they used to have seats that were like facing opposite each other, and the back,
no.
and the back, and then the exit rows, so I actually like that because you had a lot more room too, if you're facing like that. But problem is if you're facing away from, the like you're facing the back of the plane, very difficult, because, and you always wanted to sit there because there was more room, but it's very difficult because it's not a natural thing to be turned around looking, and they no longer, I heard, have seating like that. But just getting on the airplane and trying to get everybody on there, and always it was, you had Bobby Fulton, Tommy Rogers, and the Freebirds, and obviously when the Freebirds are on the plane, they're disrupting everything, and to have at that time,
because they're drunk, or
100% everybody was drunk on the plane, was drunk on the airplane, and it was tough because, they were, noisy and, it's disrupting the plane. I remember the flight attendants couldn't even, you didn't have men, at that time you didn't really see men as the flight, women, and pretty good looking because, back then they had to have certain weight, and they don't look like they do now.
Right.
You can be big and be, so they would harass the flight attendants, and I know the flight attendants hated having us on the plane.
I can imagine.
Not to mention the kids and everybody wanting to get out of their seat and go meet you.
Yeah.
Not everybody's nice. A lot of the hills were like just, really nasty to the people. Like.
Yeah. Did you ever get attacked by any fans? I know you were mostly a baby face.
Never had, but I've seen people get stabbed. A matter of fact, the guy that, the Giant Warrior, the guy that I'm staying with, he's more well known, obviously, outside the United States.
Yeah.
But I saw him get stabbed and took 55 stitches in South Africa.
Wow. Did you ever have much discussion with WWE?
Only that one time that I told you with, what's the guy's name? Eric Bischoff.
Oh, that's WCW.
WCW. So I actually was on holiday and I was staying at the same place that the Eric Bischoff and some of the wrestlers were staying. And Eric Bischoff seemed, and I was about at that time I was about 300 pounds and my hair was mid back. And Eric Bischoff came up to me and asked me, what I did, and have I ever thought about wrestling? And I said I have wrestled before, and we didn't go into detail. I didn't tell him I was a Von Erich. I said I wrestled in South Africa, and a lot of people, they didn't even know that there was wrestling in South Africa. So he said, well, you got a unique look. I would like for you to actually come out to, and I think they were at Universal Studios, and he said, would you want to do a tryout, in a dark match, and we see what you like, and maybe do an interview. And by that time I could do interviews because when I was with the Von Erichs, being as green as I was, and I never practiced beforehand, a lot of people that grew up wanting to be wrestlers, they were doing that from the time that they were 12. It wasn't like I was wanting to be a wrestler. It just kind of happened. And so I said, I took his card and I said I'd get back to him, and I never did. I wasn't interested.
I see. Did you ever actually meet Waldo? That you were supposedly Waldo's son?
Nope.
That's funny.
Everybody would ask me how he was and, everything. If that was it, you ask about me being, like known in Texas, and was that true about, people, that was why it didn't work?
Yeah.
I tell you, I think that the Waldo story would have been the part that would have buried me, because I knew nothing about Waldo.
Yeah, and the other thing is, he only lived in Toronto. It's like, could you not fly him in for like one show or something to manage him, just to give some sort of credibility? Or a picture?
Yeah.
A photo shoot?
Yeah. I mean, even they'd ask Kevin and Carrie, and they would look at each other. They didn't know what to say, and I surely didn't know what to say.
I wonder if they even smartened Waldo up to it at that time, because those guys probably didn't even talk too much in those days.
It was the weirdest thing. I was like, I had no idea that there was even really a Waldo.
What did your parents think that you're suddenly someone else's son? Did they just understand it was part of the...
My mom, whenever my parents wanted me to, go in a very different direction. And my mom, I remember her saying, whenever I told her I was going to wrestle, she said, "What am I going to tell my friends? My son the wrestler?" My mom has an accent. And she goes, "What am I going to my son's a wrestler?" She was just appalled by the idea.
They kind of shot themselves in the foot, and you explain it perfectly. I heard you explain it in other interviews. If they had just not said anything, no one would have seen them as lying to the fans, but they kind of exposed themselves. Could you explain how they exposed themselves when you left?
Look, I was already in South Africa. I was gone. They knew I was gone. They could have just said, and I was never coming back, maybe on holiday, but never coming back to Texas.
Yeah.
And they could have just gone on television and said that they could have made up anything. Say, listen, he's just, he's decided to go in a different direction. He's not going to wrestle anymore. And that would have been it. And they would have never heard from me again. But they were afraid. And my mistake probably was going with Ken Mantell and wrestling. I wasn't wrestling as, Von Erich. It was, but in hindsight, I shouldn't have done it. I should have just also just left, And but be it as it may, they could have just, because they knew I was in South Africa. Steve Simpson was still working for them. He knew I wasn't coming back, and they knew I wasn't coming back. So they could have just said, he's left the country, he's got other ideas, he's going to, pursue an acting career or anything other than the fact that what they did, because it just made them look stupid.
It made them look like liars, and I just watched the thing today of Carrie giving the speech in the ring saying, "This is the worst thing I'm going to have to tell any of you. We lied."
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. Because back in those days, kayfabe, people would, you wouldn't ride together. You wouldn't see, you'd leave in different cars, and so for them to do that, it really exposed the business.
They would have been better off saying you were dead and people thinking that you were a fake guy.
They could have said that. They could have said anything other than what they said.
Yeah.
And I think that's the downfall. That was the beginning of the end for them.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's kind of crazy, because if Fritz could have been what Vince McMahon is today, Fritz just would not, and the rest of them wanted to. Everybody in the office, including the kids, they wanted to go and take over the territories, and they could have. But Fritz didn't want it, and that's in the days when I started. You had Portland, you had Florida, you had Mid-South, you had all these different places that, he felt an obligation, and if it wasn't him, it was going to be somebody else.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part, because he could have actually been there and done exactly what McMahon had done.
So was it Ken Mantell that was booking most of your run before he left?
Yeah. Yeah, I liked him a lot. He was a really, really good booker. Not that I knew a lot of bookers, but, he really cared. And I don't know really what happened, they had some kind of falling out. I don't know what happened, but I just remember that, and he told me, is he still alive, by the way?
I don't know. That was my next question to you.
I don't know.
You never hear anything about him.
But he, I do know that he treated me well, and he told me that I should, be wrestling somewhere else too. He says, you can make more money. And that was before I knew he was going to do his own thing. But I do know that he, I had a feeling that he was going to leave just because of the fact that, for him to tell me that was a pretty good indication, because, if you're the booker, that's not what you would tell somebody.
Was Gary Hart there at all when you were there, or was it always Ken?
Yeah, he was there.
How did you get along?
He wasn't the booker, but he didn't like me. I mean, he never treated me bad or anything, but I think he thought that I had it too easy.
Yeah, because he was old school. But I read his book. He just does nothing but put himself over in his book.
Oh.
Like he's Superman. But is it true you have 7 citizenships?
I've lived in all these places, but I don't have 7 citizenships.
Okay. How many citizenships
3.
do you have? Okay. Could have been on your Wikipedia. It also says, and this might be old, and it says you're a multi-millionaire worth $6 million on your Wikipedia.
Yeah, well, that was because I sold my business.
Yeah. That was when you sold all your gyms?
Uh-huh.
That was when you sold all your gyms?
Uh-huh. No, I know on my Facebook.
Yeah.
I don't know if I got hacked, so I have 2 different Facebooks. The one that I'm trying to get it back.
Yeah.
On that, it says the places that I've lived.
Yeah.
So I've lived in a few places. I was in the hotel industry.
Yeah.
And I can work. I'm not now, but I could work from anywhere.
Yeah. So
I was spending 6 months in South Africa, 6 months in Mexico, and so while I was doing that, I lived in St. Martin. On the time that I was here instead of Mexico, St. Martin, St. Lucia, and Dominican Republic.
Oh, wow.
But I was, involved in getting these hotels working. So that's how, that you might think that and then I lived in India, but that was because I was making the film, and South Africa, obviously, here in Mexico. So if you count that up, that's 7. If I hadn't ended up getting fired not fired, but quitting.
Yeah.
If they had offered me the money, I would have stayed. But he wasn't going to let me have any more money, And so for me, it just wasn't worthwhile, because I'm not going to do something for free.
Right.
Or barely make ends meet, I didn't even have insurance, So if I hadn't been pushed that way, I would have never opened up the health clubs in South Africa, and would have never, had the life that I had. So sometimes life pushes you in a way that you should have gone in anyway.
Yes.
Gone to anyway, and that's my case, that it's pushed me to be where I was, and it was a great business because it was a cash business too. But I told you I sold to, indirectly, but I sold to Richard Branson.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird because I had a friend that worked for me that told me that Branson was coming and they're willing to give you such and such for your business. So don't hold out for more, but when they'll put you out of business if you don't sell to them, they'll just build across the street from you. It'll cost them more to do, but they'll put you out of business.
Like what WWE did to everybody.
Yeah. So it took me a year. I knew what they were willing to give me, and I ran with it. I don't have all of it though, because I have an ex-wife that I had to give half of it to.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and people can buy your book on Amazon, Lance by Chance. We'll definitely have to do a part 2, but do you want to say anything about your book for people that have watched this far?
To say a little bit about the book, it's about, I guess the first 2.5 chapters is about Portland, about Dallas, and kind of the things that most people wouldn't talk about, is actually said in the book. And so I'm not going to give all of it away, obviously, but the rest of the chapters has something to do with wrestling, but it's about the wrestling, but kind of the things that happened to me while I was wrestling. So it's not about, a certain territory. It's about like the India thing and being blown up on the train, or the train blown up, and just the things that happened along the way. And it's actually done really well, and it is a good read. I never thought, after doing the book, I was doing, little pieces at a time. It was during COVID. It took me 1.5 years to write, myself and Vinny. And I wasn't even going to read the book. And one day I actually sat down and I read it, and I couldn't put it down, and I couldn't believe that it came out like it did. And and many people that have picked up the book actually said that they'd actually read it, and it's an easy read. It's a couple hundred pages, but they said it's an easy read, but they couldn't put it down. So it must be, and it's not only me, but it must be somewhat entertaining, because many people have told me that. So anyway, you can go to Lance by Chance and actually order the book.
And any final message you'd like to give the fans today?
Well, no, it's actually great to be here in the States and kind of see, because I've been gone for so long. I live in Mexico, but it's nice to, be out and see some of the wrestling fans that still remember the Von Erichs and me. I know there's some pissed off fans in Texas that, because I left or whatever the reason might be, they think I betrayed the family. But the majority of them out there are genuinely glad to see that I'm alive, because, there's a lot of different rumors out there, and, I just disappeared, so nobody really knew. And
you were in the Baja with Jesse Ventura, where he always talks about living.
Yeah, he spends 6 months out of the year down there in a motorhome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mexico's a great place to come visit too. We got weather that's warmer than pretty much wherever you are right now. The weather in Mexico, you see I'm halfway dressed with warm clothes, but the other half is like, I never wear pants. There's always shorts in Mexico. But yeah, it's great to come visit the States and see, a lot of people that I've wrestled in the past with, and see that there's some of them are still around, and hopefully for a while longer. And thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.